said at the beginning of the interview that you have taken a number of liberties when it's about the setting. What have you changed from the world and the words of Machen to the terror beneath? What differences can people find?
So with the terror beneath, it's you get two settings, and each setting has a different feel to it. So you have the Welsh wilderness, which is much more folk horror. So much more around your Midsummers, your Blair Witches, your In the Earths type thing. Creepy folk horror, strange witch cults and things like that, and creatures of folklore that never really died, and here they are causing havoc in small mining villages in Wales. And the other is the London metropolis, and this is where you have more of the a look into London's occult underbelly. And this is where you kind of get more of the strange science side of things as well, and how that interacts with the upper echelons of parliament and nobility and government and things like that. So the main thing I did was really build those two things out. With Machen, we get, I guess, as I said at the top of this, you have this through line of you have certain characters that will turn up, and you'll have certain creatures that might turn up again and again. For instance, you have the so-called like wee folk, the little people who in sort of Victorian times were these are the fairy creatures, but in actuality they were these horrid, squat, cannibalistic creatures that existed since the beginning of time, and they're only just really showing themselves now. So those things that in this are called the Vor, those things show up in Machen's work every now and again. With moving it to this, essentially moving it to the post First World War years and over that decade, really. The main thing has been technology and science and government changes as well there. So while Machen didn't get too much into that, some of his stories were. So, for example, there's a story called The Inmost Light, which is a really great tale about a doctor who may or may not have trapped his wife's soul in a stone, and something else might have inhabited the body instead. And to do this, he's used sort of these rituals as well as using science as well, and that kind of comes up time again. It comes up in the Great God Pan as well, where the sort of I suppose some of the antagonists, the main antagonist of that was born because of an encounter, a pretty horrendous encounter in the mind of a young girl who saw the Great God Pan, and that was due to essentially a lobotomy and this kind of this sort of pagan rite. So it's taking that element and turning it up to 10. So using a lot of the similar characters, but maybe saying, okay, well, these characters were doing this here in the 1800s. What are they doing now? And I guess the one big change is, and I probably should have mentioned it before because it's kind of one of the main things, is that you have a society. It's called the Gold Tiberius Society. And this was set up early in the 1800s, essentially as a way to go and investigate these strange anomalies. And it was set up by some of the investigators that you'll find in Machen's stories. But it kind of went wrong because really humanity is no match for these strange things that are happening and these pagan gods and folkloric beings. So people either moved away, or they got lost in the other world, or they may have died as well. And sometimes it's actually up to the GM to decide what happened here and maybe even bring those characters back. But the reason why the investigators, the characters, are invited to join the Gold Tiberius Society is because they need new blood. That, you know, everyone else is gone, everyone else is either dead or lost or whatever, and they need to kind of continue this. So every character has something called a terror beneath, which is the thing that has kind of given them a glimpse into this other world. So, you know, whether that's some strange nightmares of a black pyramid, or seeing a horned goat creature in the woods or something like that. And the Gold Tiberius Society reaches out and says, look, we know that there are things beyond what you've seen. Maybe you want to investigate that more, and that feeds into characters' drives. Why do they want to actually continue towards the horror, which is kind of the main part of any kind of horror narrative? Why do you go down into the dark basement? Well, you have a drive for that in this. So the Tiberius Society is the thing that drives all this, and for me, that was the almost the logical next step from the Machen stories, where you had a group of people who were brought together, funnily enough, by a Gold Tiberius coin, and they would have adventures, and they would often do their investigations. So it makes sense to build this out a little bit more, but it also makes sense to build out the world more and the kinds of people and creatures that they would come up against. Really, Machen hinted at certain things, but he never really went too much in depth into them. We know that this is a world where creatures of folklore are lurking in the shadows, and that's hinted at in a lot of Machen's work. So, but you know, I want to answer, well, what creatures are those, and how do they impact society? What are they doing? If they were put in a 1920s sort of scenario, or they were in a Welsh mining town, what would that mean for the people there? So it's using kind of the setting, using Machen's work, and using the time period as well to, I suppose, just build that out more. You know, for example, in the 1920s, quite a large part of Wales was destitute. The mines were closed down, and as a result, also the mine owners and the kind of the landed gentry there, all of their estates just completely crumbled. You know, they weren't making money. They had to move away from their big estates, and what that meant was that you have these big manors with no one in them, or you know, people not residing there, or these absolute husks that used to be these, you know, from this kind of glorious period, and that's a really nice kind of built-in setting for horror, really. You know, what moves in there? What if this landed gentry stay there, but what if they turn to blasphemous rites in order to continue to live there? And there are specific things in the book that deal specifically with that. And you know, there was also this was also a time where actually people in Wales, in these towns, were less likely to go to church. They were kind of turning a little bit away from organized religion. Well, you know, in that case, were they moving towards more pagan rituals and things like that? Again, some of the stuff that actually happened really fueled the sort of some of the decisions and some of the horror, finding the horror, which actually I was at Dragon Meet a few years ago, and And this was when I was kind of sketching all of this out, and I was in watching a panel with Kenneth Haidt and Robin Laws, and I asked the question there, how do you go about finding the horror? Because they do a great job, I think, specifically in the Yellow King and the Absinthe in Carcosa source book, which is, hey, how do you take all of these like historical things but actually make them really creepy in a way that kind of feels real? And of course, Kenneth Haidt gave an excellent answer, and really helped me really build into that and find what is the horror around London. Where are the actual places that you can go and visit? What actually could happen there in a Machen story? Machen himself was a flaneur. He was someone who would walk the streets of London. He wrote the London Adventure, a book that is really much a kind of a meditation on London and its streets and its history and kind of that psychogeography side of it. And he very much got his inspiration from wherever he went in London, and it was almost like it's almost Blakean in a way, where he's looking at things and he's seeing creatures moving in the night, in the dark, and not necessarily the angels that William Blake might see. Really, quite the opposite. And I definitely wanted to bring that element into the game. So there's a lot of locations that you could go to in real life and in the game. They might have a tie to John Dee, Elizabeth I's kind of occultists, and there's something called the Arcanium, which is actually below the Thames, or below the Tower of London, and that's a huge library repository of occult information that was created by John Dee, and in there you can scry and speak to what you think are angels but may not be angels with a scrying disc. So it's taking that occult belly of London and kind of revving it up to 10 and making it very, just like Machen all over it, really.
I love that you have answered a question that I was going to ask you, and is that what makes this setting British? What makes it London? And I think you've answered that marvelously. But what's going to come next? Because my impression from what you're saying to me and all the things that you've mentioned is that there is such a vast potential to go further into Scotland, further into Wales, and I don't know, Cornwall, and find out even more about it. What are your plans for the Terror Beneath?
So immediately after the book comes out, there's going to be a free mystery scenario that you can download, and that will be, so the one in the book is specifically based in the London metropolis. And the one that you'll be able to get for free will be for the Welsh wilderness, so much more of the folk horror vibes. In terms of what I'd like to do next, I would really like to do kind of a bit of a scenario book. It's not something I've really talked to Osprey about it yet. I want to see, obviously, how the book does first. If people are really digging it and really enjoying it, then I'd definitely like to do more. So I really like the sort of the collections that Chaosium do around I think like Doors to Darkness and things like that, where they might have 5 or 6 scenarios in there, and I think something like this kind of really lives on its scenarios, right? While there's a lot in the book itself around how do you create a horror investigation, what kind of clues that you should be using, or how should you structure it, and what is horror and what is terror and things like that. a lot of people want to just run it from a book. I mean, if you look at Call of Cthulhu, that is the absolute majority of what they publish, right? It's really big campaigns. And while I don't necessarily think that big sprawling campaigns is really kind of necessary for this, it certainly is much more about these I guess individual scenarios set in specific locations and finding that horror there rather than kind of globetrotting and things like that. I think there's definitely scope to go further. I mean, one of my absolute passions is folklore. It's I have a lot of books and things about the folklore of the British Isles. So, and there's so much out there that I'd be able to play with, as you say, Cornwall, Manx folklore, Scotland, Northeast, really anywhere, Ireland, and there's so much terror to find there in terms of what kind of gods were there, because really what we're doing is I'm looking at in this case, well, I'm with Wales. I'm looking at what kind of Welsh gods were they? What kind of Welsh gods might be the kind of the big threat there, or what kind of Roman gods? Because obviously due to Roman invasions and things like that. But when it comes to maybe going further north, let's say to my neck of the woods in Yorkshire, well, actually, that's the Danelaw. That's where the Danes came, and the Vikings. So what kind of gods would we be seeing there? What does Loki actually look like? Because in the game you have the sort of the Avatar version, which is the version that you'll see in classical paintings and sculptures. And then you've got the actual hideous, ridiculous version, which is just too scary to look upon. So even like Venus, for example. So Venus is a great god or a great goddess in this case in the game. And of course she is the goddess of love. Well, what does that mean for Venus? Well, actually, she's also the goddess of total mind domination. She wants you to think her way, and she presents herself the way that artists present her as this beautiful woman. In actuality, she is an absolute monster. So there's a lot that can be done there with the setting. If we go to Scotland, do we look at like the Cailleach, for example, Ireland, and look at the Cailleach, or its equivalent in Scotland. So yeah, I think that's certainly, there's just a lot to play with. And actually, one of the I suppose the framing devices of the game is something called the Scarlet Map. And the Scarlet Map is something that the Gold Tiberius Society have been putting together for decades. And this is a map of all of these sacred lines and where things crisscross and where the bleed might be. And ultimately, that's going to expand outwards. The more they investigate, the more bleed that they're going to find, and the more convergences, and the more weird stuff that they're going to find there. So I think watch this space. I want to see what happens with the book itself. I want to see what people do with the scenario and the download. But yeah, I totally love to really investigate more. As you say, there's just so much more to do, even in just the two settings that we have here. There's just so much we can do.
Well, I very, very much look forward to that. I haven't seen the book yet. I hope I'm going to be able to get a copy soon so I can delve into it, because it does sound absolutely fascinating. Scott, thank you very, very much indeed for being with me today. This has been absolutely brilliant, truly. And I hope that I will have many excuses and reasons to bring you back in the future.
Please do. Thanks so much. No, it's been great. And yeah, I love talking about Machen. So